everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Andy is here with me as we have another episode of Ultimate Journey, and this will be episode 2 of the DC side of things, also known as The Ultimate Journey, The Road to Blackest Night. Andy, how you doing?
I'm doing really good. I'm very excited to talk about this one, and it's cool to continue a journey. We're officially on a step 2, and that's exciting.
Yeah, so basically, we're gonna fast forward about a decade, maybe a little under a decade actually, to this point in time, because when we talk about the road to Blackest Night, there's one specific hero that is very much the centerpiece of this whole journey, and that, of course, is Green Lantern. And when I say Green Lantern, I don't just mean one Green Lantern, because there's a lot of Green Lanterns involved in this story. So today we're going to be talking about the tipping point for the legend himself, the original silver-aged Green Lantern, Hal Jordan. And it's a very interesting story because not only is it a pivotal piece of the story that will eventually lead to Blackest Night, it was also a pivotal moment for the Green Lantern book. And I'll explain that a little bit further. So the only thing I have to say, Andy, is I kind of feel that we're doing a little bit of a disservice here for the viewers because we are literally skipping over a major story to get to this point. And of course, we like to tell people on the Ultimate Journey, if you want to go a little bit deeper, there's other things that you can check out. So the story of Emerald Twilight actually starts in the middle of Reign of the Supermen with issue number 46 of Green Lantern, volume 2, I believe. And it was written by Gerard Jones. And the interesting thing about this is that this is right smack in the middle of Reign of the Supermen. And before that, we had one of the most landmark and most iconic moments in DC Comics history, the death of Superman. I mean, Andy, how do you feel about the fact that we're actually skipping this extremely iconic story?
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think it's fine for our purposes because, while we are like really reading all of the core stuff to get us where we are, there's absolutely no way we're going to read absolutely every DC comic and every DC event that happens in between these. What we're going to talk about today is the part that really matters for Blackest Night. And reading this, just to jump in a little bit, reading this for the first time, this was the first time I read this, really drove home just how important this like short little arc is to Blackest Night. These couple issues impact so much. So while Death of Superman, Reign of the Superman, important stories and good and enjoyable, I don't think when we eventually get to Blackest Night, you will be thinking about them on every page the way I basically will with this story.
Much. Yeah, I mean, listen, guys. Superman Doomsday, Death of Superman, Funeral for a Friend, and Reign of the Supermen. Great work. It's a great crossover throughout all the Supermen comics at the time. There were 4 of them, 4 titles. And the interesting thing is, this specific issue, Green Lantern number 46, is one of the only 2 titles outside of the Superman titles that was actually connected to this major iconic story. And I found it very interesting that out of all of those books, you give us just 1 Green Lantern issue. But it's important. It is, because in this specific issue, during Reign of the Supermen, there's a plot between Mongol and Cyborg Superman, who turns out to be the villainous Cyborg, aka Hank Henshaw, and they want to try and conquer Earth while Superman is quote-unquote dead. So what is one of the things that they do? They they practically level Hal Jordan's hometown of Coast City. And when And the interesting thing about this book in specific is Green Lantern, when it was in the 70s, when it was taken over by legends like Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil, they took the whole concept of the Green Lantern and the sci-fi elements and they really flipped it on its head, because here was a character that was constantly fighting crime in space. And then in the 70s, he comes back down to Earth and he starts handling things that are going on Earth, everything from drug addictions, discovering those things with his buddy Green Arrow, because Green Arrow and Green Lantern were pretty much a great duo at the time, as well as other crazy things like anti-establishment and a lot of distrust towards the government. So he was learning about what he was missing when he was away from Earth. And at the same time, he was introduced to other Green Lanterns that took the mantle so they could handle things on Earth in Sector 2814. We were introduced to characters like John Stewart. We were introduced to characters like Guy Gardner. So this is, I think, a second point in the Green Lantern lore where we get something completely different and completely unorthodox, something never done before. Hal comes back to Coast City and he can't grieve at the moment, even concern himself if his love interest Carol is still alive. He goes alongside Steel, the Eradicator, and Supergirl, and basically tries to beat Mongol to a bloody pulp.
And I would say that's basically where we come in the part of the story that we are reading for this arc. And I think what we see is Hal at his lowest moment, right? Which is what is going to be so important. And I'm framing this in terms of Blackest Night more than the last part of our journey, because I feel that the the motivation of the character in this story is one that runs through into Blackest Night in what feels like a very, very direct way to me by comparison. Whereas Crisis on Infinite Earths kind of gives us this launching point, this breaking point of where we start with a couple of key scenes, that will matter. Here, when we actually go into a dedicated Green Lantern book, is where I start to feel we're seeing the same characters. And to talk about Blackest Night a little bit, I felt Geoff Johns reading this while I was reading this, right?
Yeah.
The way that Blackest Night reflects back on it, which we will talk to obviously when we eventually get there more, it made me feel the weight of the way eyes are on this story in a way it wasn't in Crisis on Infinite Earths, whereas that's more useful background to us. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
So after that one specific issue that ties in with Reign of the Supermen, obviously we know the aftermath. Big Blue is back and everybody's happy and the world goes on. And then it's now time for Hal to gather his bearings and finally get his opportunity to grieve his losses. And he is devastated. I mean, crushed beyond reprieve, to the point where he actually does something that is against the Green Lantern code. And that is, he tries to recreate things from people that he knows in Coast City to his own parents, practically recreating Coast City with the use of the power ring on its own until the power officially drains. And that is when he is officially encountered by a vision of one of the Guardians saying, Hal Jordan of Sector 2814, you have violated the Green Lantern code because you have used your ring for personal gain, and you now need to surrender your power to us. And because of where he is emotionally, the Emerald Twilight begins with a big middle finger to the Guardians. That's pretty much where we start.
Pretty much. And you understand how we got to this point, because if I have the only negative thing I have to say about this, and I'm going to get it out of the way at the beginning so I can be entirely positive from the way out, because spoiler alert, I really enjoyed what I've read.
I'm happy to hear.
The only negative thing would be this is a very short arc.
Yeah.
There are definitely people who might say that this happens too quickly. And if you're following the journey with us, we miss part of the lead up to this just a little bit. We come in at his lowest moments, really. But you see the whole, he is kicked when he is down. He finally gets that moment to grieve. And does he grieve? No. Hal's in this moment of needing to grieve and realizing he has the power to do something more. And the Guardians don't meet him with any kind of compassion over what happened. There's an expectation that, to a certain extent, we understand as people who like know the Green Lantern character and the expectations upon, the Green Lantern Corps more broadly. But you would think that after the heavy loss that he has just experienced, there'd be a moment of understanding, a moment of intervention, perhaps not responding with like bringing the hammer down that strongly to the one moment of grief. Even though letter of the law, he was stepping outside the bounds of what is supposed to be expected of his position. But I say all of this to say it credibly starts to be the unraveling of Hal in that moment beyond the grief. The grief alone would not have been enough, I think, for the character to take the turn that he does in the course of this arc. It's the grief combined with the failure of everyone around Hal to do something right by him in the moment where they needed to. And I think that's where the story works. So while I start with the minor negative of it all happens very quickly, it happens quickly, but it doesn't happen for no reason. We know exactly why it happens, and it's painful to read as a result.
Yeah, I mean, we go from a story like Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is very much dramatic, very much atmospheric, but also very, very dialogue heavy. Like, there's a lot of slow moving parts in an epic grand story like that. Emerald Twilight, brief, yes, but it's all action and very little talk. Like, we're
And
literally talking action
atmospheric.
speak it louder than words in this case.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's the actions that drive the drama, because while you go through these 3 issues of Emerald Twilight, we're talking Green Lantern issues 48 through 50, you feel Hal's anguish, and you see his pain, because what is he going to do now that he's basically been told you need to surrender this power to the Guardians? And let me just trail off a little bit. Does anyone have any sympathy for the Guardians at all? Like, do the truest of Green Lantern fans really care for the Guardians? Because you know that I love Green Lantern, but oh my God, maybe outside of Ganthet, the Guardians are such bastards. I'm sorry.
Well, if you don't like any of the Guardians other than Ganthet, you're gonna really enjoy where this arc goes.
Yeah. So anyway, no, you know something? You'd also expect the Guardians to do that, because it's also very interesting because of the fact that the whole concept of the Lantern Corps is emotion, and yet the Guardians themselves show no emotion whatsoever. It's such a textbook definition of hypocrisy, you know?
I say that like Hal is failed by those around him, clearly by the Guardians for exactly that reason that you're talking about, the lack of emotion, the lack of ability to engage with him. And as we move into, the second issue of this story arc, like we see him be failed by people who this we've seen this character work with, trust. Nobody talks to Hal. The way to have this story go differently, the way that we didn't have to end where we do end, is with somebody meeting him where he's at in his grief and trying to talk about it. Because we know Hal Jordan, and we know that it didn't need to go this way. We'll talk
Yeah.
about issue 3 when we get to issue 3, but I'll let you jump in, Steve.
Yeah, so basically we just discussed issue number 1, and what he does is he basically tells the Guardians after he gives them the finger, he's like, all right, well, if you're not going to let me have this power because that's the other thing. People around him have failed, but he also feels in this moment that he has failed Coast City. That's
Sure.
the other big part of failure here. So he says, I'm coming for you. I'm coming to Oa, and I'm coming to take the central power battery for myself. And if anybody wants to get in my way, just try. So he is on fire right now. This man is out for blood.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying that nobody talks to him. And it's true. We see his colleague basically answering the call to stop him.
Yep.
And in issue 2, you see him take down some of his nearest and dearest friends. I think one of the toughest pieces in the second issue, not to mention that beautiful cover of his face with that evil smile on him, holding his hands up, holding all those power rings, because that's what he does. Every time he takes down a lantern, he's taken down Lyra, he's taken down Boudica, he takes down his good friend Tomar too. That was probably one of the hardest parts for me to read. And
it's a tough issue.
Yeah,
it's a tough issue. And I'm glad you mentioned the cover, because the cover is iconic. Absolutely.
Yes, it's a very well-known cover.
And it shows you where we're going. If the end of issue 1 in the arc didn't let you know, oh, this is bad.
Yeah.
Issue 2 is a rough read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you even have to take a look at the Guardians, and they're basically saying, oh, what are we going to do? He means it. He's coming to kill us. So, of course, they secretly talk to Ganthet and say, we need to have a plan B just in case something happens. Well, that turns out to be plan C, if I'm being quite frank, because the last page in that issue is, I don't know if this was something that had happened in the Green Lantern books before, but the Guardians are so desperate to prevent Hal from coming to Oa that they actually reach out to their greatest nemesis to stop Hal. And on the last page of book 2 in this story, we see Sinestro ready to fight for the Guardians, and he's happy to do it because he gets to possibly kill Hal.
And it shows you, it's one of those moments that really kind of seals for me how Hal could have this fall, right? It's not just nobody reaches out to him. It's that what they're doing instead affirms all of his worst impulses and most negative read on what is happening and how people are responding to him. And by bringing Sinestro into it, when Hal sees Sinestro's face, it's over. As if it weren't over before, there is now no coming back from this. All trust is broken. All faith is broken. All hope is broken. The only thing he believes in at that point is his will being greater, which it is. He's Hal Jordan, right?
And the other thing, and the other thing that I specifically didn't get to mention is we also see in Emerald Twilight, this is also the first couple of Green Lantern issues that are officially having a new writer on the book. Gerard Jones had left the book right before issue 48, and we get Ron Mars on this book for the very first time. Ron Mars is a crucial Green Lantern writer, and I will also say he is a great writer. I actually had the opportunity to meet him in person, and he is he's a real gentleman. So glad I got a chance to meet him, have him sign a couple of my books. But he did a great job starting at his starting point. And I just got to say, like, when I first, because this is my second time reading this story, but I will say that when Sinestro was in the green outfit, not the yellow outfit, and then when we get into the third issue, he talks about how, Oh, I totally understand where you're coming from, Hal. I can understand how you hate the Guardians so much. It's the reason why, and that's another thing. We get a little bit into Sinestro's backstory about how he actually was the greatest Green Lantern of all time, and that he saw through the Guardians, and then he goes, but I'm just answering the call because I just want to kill you, and I'm going to be happy to do it for them. That's what I
It's
love about Sinestro.
it's great stuff, and it's to talk, since this is our first time diving into a Green Lantern book, it's an opportunity to say something that resonates about Green Lantern, the character, the world, and like this slice of the DC universe is there's something compelling about a character who's tied to virtuous emotion. There's just something compelling about that to read. Um, it's why this is one of the look, before all of this ultimate journey, we've talked about Batman, we've talked about Superman. Outside of DC, we've talked about we've talked about Spider-Man. We've talked about these characters that resonate with people. And look, Green Lantern is beloved, but not selling multi-million-dollar films every year the way some of these characters are, right? But I think to a comic reader, there's something really, really special about Green Lantern when you realize, what this character brings to the table that's beyond what other superheroes might, and what the focus is. And I think you've nailed it in the way you're talking about Sinestro here, Steve, because it's so impactful to see Sinestro in the green and everything that it means, because due to the focus on emotions and the virtue of the Green Lanterns, there's something really like visceral to someone who knows these characters in this scene, to see how that fight plays out, to see Sinestro in the green, to see how having this fall from grace that he's having. And it's like, well, Sinestro is equally in green right now, right? And seeing that really what we're watching really might be the fall of Hal Jordan. There really is not going to be a saving storybook ending to this arc coming up to pull us out of it, which is tough. um and we talk about, in comparison, the Crisis on Infinite Earth, there's a lot less text in this. It is very action heavy, but it's action heavy in a way, to be a broken record, loaded with emotion, right?
Yeah.
And it's very resonant, and it makes this a very different book than what we last read, but one that shows doesn't tell, and we are there along with for the ride the entire time. And
Yeah.
this
And the
this third
artist,
issue is the third
yeah.
issue is the linchpin of that.
Yeah, and you also got to give credit to the artist, Daryl Banks joining up with Ron Mars. The action sequences, the splash pages in issue number 50 are so breathtaking and so they pop. They really, really do. And the battle is everything you could possibly want in just a few short pages. It is everything and anything. And it ends, I will personally say, not the way you want it to go, because you don't want to see Hal go further and further down this dark path. But unfortunately, we see it. He kills Sinestro. And then it gets even worse. He kills Kilowog. That's something that a lot of Green Lantern fans never want to see. And then, of course, it all culminates in the destruction of the power battery. He then officially dons this menacing suit of armor, and all but one Guardian survives Hal's onslaught. He has literally gone insane due to his loss of his people, his city, and his thirst for the power to find his inner peace. And unfortunately, it just leads to death, destruction, and darkness. And Hal Jordan, even though he's stolen all of his power through murder and bloodshed, he's not a Green Lantern anymore, my friends. He's gone.
It is not the end that we wanted to see to this story. And obviously, it's not the end of Hal Jordan's character. And the reason we are reading this as part of the journey is because of how important Hal will continue to be, how important this moment of the destruction will be. This is it's so crazy in comparison to Crisis on Infinite Earths. Crisis on Infinite Earths, we like make this little like wink at the camera moment where it's like this one part will matter, and then Emerald Twilight is just like, God damn, this is the prologue to Blackest Night. What we just read. This is where it starts. Um, and there's more to come, and we rise from it. I will say, the way that I read this book was as part of a digital trade paperback, which goes immediately next into the rest of the run. And I did just keep reading. I know it's outside of our journey, but like, how could
But
you not?
but
It's you
hey,
need
I
that
mean,
pick me
I
up.
just want to know how you felt when you saw all of this death and destruction happen. Like, was this
It's
what were you
awesome.
expecting this?
I mean, I knew where we were gonna end up, right? Because I haven't read this arc before, but I'm a comic fan. I've read the core books of Blackest Night. I've read other parts of the journey. I hadn't read these issues, but I know how it ended. And yet I was sitting there like, don't. Don't, don't.
Yeah.
Um, it's a rough one, and that's part of why I kept reading, right? Because it's one of those endings where you think, oh, it can't end. I I gotta keep
No,
going. I
and,
need
and it
I need
doesn't,
my
and
pick
it
me up
doesn't,
now. Yeah,
because a very important epilogue, I will call it an epilogue,
yeah.
takes place. And again, this is why I have so much respect for Ron Mars, because then we get Green Lantern issue number 51. Gambit, Plan C was to create a single power ring. One more, the last Green Lantern ring. The last Guardian with the last Green Lantern ring, he goes out to find someone worthy to become the last Green Lantern. And I found it very funny because he doesn't have a lot of time on his hands. He knows Hal's probably coming for him next. So he basically finds the first person that he finds and he says, okay, you're going to
It's
have to
you.
do. And it ends up
Yeah.
being a cartoonist named Kyle Rayner, and he becomes the new and yet the last, for the time at this point, Green Lantern. Kyle Rayner is my favorite Green Lantern, so I'm glad that I got to read his origin story. It's
Mhm.
brief, it's got, and I'm glad that it goes right into it because we get a little bit of lightheartedness and we get a little bit
Yeah.
of humor because the issue is just funny. He gets the Green Lantern power. He has no idea what to do with it. He goes to visit his ex-girlfriend, Alex, and says, hey, could you help me? And then he says, oh, can I sleep with you too? But that was actually kind of funny. It was also a very interesting thing because we were actually seeing at this time how comics were actually getting a little bit more on the mature side after the Silver and Bronze Age being very much child and family oriented. So we're really seeing a very mature kind of story being told about a guy who is not necessarily struggling, but he wants bigger and better things for his life. So he asks his ex-girlfriend, hey, could you possibly like follow me with a camera and videotape all my adventures? It's lighthearted fun. That's really what it is. And I think it's something after a crazy story like Emerald Twilight is very much needed.
We deserve it. That's really the feeling that when you end on that shot, just seeing Hal in the armor like that, and the weight of everything that just happened, and the loss, and loss will we've talked about that in Crisis on Infinite Earths. We're going to talk about it throughout the entirety of this journey. When you experience loss like that, it's really great to get to experience some levity, something to pull you out of it. And obviously, there will be moments of great joy and great levity throughout this journey. But this was a very needed, there's some humor, there's some fun, there's some adventure, a very needed change up.
Yeah. And of course, to finish it all up, when he realizes that, and that's what's the very interesting thing. he doesn't really get the 411 from Ganthet. He doesn't really get an understanding of why he was chosen, what this ring is for. He doesn't even know the oath. That's what's even funnier. But at the end, he basically says, well, if I'm going to be the Green Lantern, I mean, I'm not the original Green Lantern. I need to show people that I'm my own guy. And he gets a brand new suit. And, you know, getting into comics at that time, that was when I always knew what the classic Green Lantern looked like. But then, of course, you know, what was going on in Green Lantern in the 90s? Well, here's Kyle. Here's your Green Lantern. It's a whole new suit. It's awesome. So I'm just like, all right, let's roll with it, baby. Let's read on.
And that's the character, right? Right? Yeah,
Yep.
there's a reason that he's beloved. And you know, it's funny thinking back on how that could have gone so many different ways, right? And obviously there are people who have their preferences between characters, which we don't need to get into tonight. Maybe one of these days we'll do some character profile on Green Lantern and dive a little deeper into that side of things. But you know, it's really great to have a character come out of a story this dark and have it then resonate with fans. You said yourself he's your favorite Green Lantern, and I get it.
Well, I like him for certain other reasons. I mean, the thing that I love the most about him is because of the fact that, unlike Hal, he actually has a very creative mind because of the fact that he's a cartoonist. So he comes up with these incredibly cool constructs. Like, we're now no longer in the days of the gigantic green fist. We're getting it kicked up another notch because of what's going on in Kyle's mind. So let me just say, if you like this story and you end at issue 51, I will definitely say, in between this point and where our next stop on the Ultimate Journey is going to be, read a little bit more of the Green Lantern run. Read the first story arc or two of Ron Mars's Green Lantern with Kyle Rayner. You will see very interesting stories. You will see some very disturbing moments. As a matter of fact, I believe that the first story arc of Ron Mars's Green Lantern features one of the most gruesome deaths of a person in the history of DC Comics. Mm-hmm. And if you read on, I'm curious if you actually read that, Andy.
I guess I haven't, because I only read a couple issues further because it was what was in my trade. And there's still a couple left in my trade. So I will see. But I will say that I recommend doing it because I've had a lot of fun so far. And I'm really, really happy that that's the way I chose to read it. So it was a natural page turner for me.
Yeah, and you'll also be introduced, you'll see Mongol come back, and you'll also be introduced to another character in the world of DC who we don't really see that often, Major Force, who is a very interesting character. But yeah, that's where we're going to stop, everybody. It's a brief story. I know this is one of our shorter episodes, but trust me, this is just one additional stop on a very long journey. We will be back next time for the second chapter in our Marvel Ultimate Journey Road to Secret Wars. But I'm really looking forward to our next DC stop because of the fact that it is going to be another crisis, and appropriately so, because it happens to be this year, the 30th anniversary of this specific crisis. So in the meantime, Andy, thank you very much for joining me again. Another great conversation. And everybody out there, please leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. And we will see you in the next one.
Always great. Bye, Steve. Bye, everybody.